So I'm going to bring to the stage two people that literally don't need an introduction. It's very rare that somebody is routinely referred to as a national treasure. I mean, literally, it's almost like it's her middle name. It's like her social security number. Anna Deavere Smith, national treasure. But if you want to change a society for the better, there are two basic ways you can go. One is to try and change the culture using art. And to be able to say that as an artist you've been able to impact the consciousness of a country, that's a very bold claim. But nobody would deny that Anna Deavere Smith has been able to do that through her original and unique approach to theater and to art. The other way to do it is to try to change politics, change policy. There's probably nobody who was more central to the quality and the character of the Obama administration than Valerie Jarrett, another national treasure. So I want to welcome to the stage, I'm going to need your help, not one, but two iconic, legendary, freedom-fighting sisters. Welcome to the stage, Anna Deavere Smith in conversation with Valerie Jarrett. Welcome to the stage. Oh, it's good. You're in the middle. You're in the middle. You're in the middle. Check, check.
We said backstage you could introduce us anytime.
Oh, I told you I'm having a good week. And we're going to have a good evening. But the first thing I want to say is just thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I just want to say that because.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get to you, but I want to start with you. I can thank her personally, but I can thank you on behalf of the community. Look, why do you do it the way you do it? It is you could do it. You could get a team of people. You could send them out. They could do the interviews. They could develop the characters. You're at a stage now where you could sit back. You could be the producer. You could be the director. You know, Anna Deavere Smith presents. We still come. Why do you do it so intimately with such emotional cost to yourself?
Well, I don't know if it's an emotional cost to myself, number one. Number two, my grandfather said when I was a girl, if you say a word often enough, it becomes you. And so since the late 70s, I've been trying to become America word for word with a tape recorder. And there are very many reasons for that. There's artistic reasons, there's intellectual reasons, there's political reasons, and there's personal reasons. And that's really my life's work. And as far as I would do it, forever if I could, because there's really nothing like sitting in front of a person, particularly in the midst of a struggle or a catastrophe. And I'm a dramatist, so I like catastrophe. And I like big operations, And to sit with a person who's trying to make sense, like Kevin Moore just now that we saw, and it's really studying Shakespeare that got me to this. But to give you an example, at the moment that Kevin says, have you ever been to a place where you don't feel tired, you just tired of being tired, where you're fed up and there's nothing else left and you can't get any lower? And I say, like rock bottom. He says, past rock bottom, past that. And I say, well, what do? And you got to keep climbing. You got to keep fighting. You got to keep climbing. You got to keep praying. Now watch this. You got to do all the things you know to make yourself stronger, because in the end, you're going to need every bit of strength that you can muster to get yourself from this hole. It's like a bunch of crabs pulling you back, and you fighting and you fighting and you're sinking faster and faster. It's like quicksand, right? So when we studied in classical training, one of the things that was very important that we learned is that the breath is a measure of the thought. So here I am standing in war-torn Baltimore right after the riot, right at the site where Freddie Gray was beaten, in front of the mural, right? And here is this man doing what I learned in an MFA program about Shakespeare. And so how could I stop doing that? How could I stop listening for that type of verbal acuity? And from a man who didn't finish high school, spent a lot of his life so far, young life, in prison, and he read the dictionary backwards and forward. I'm interested in that.
We're glad you are. We're glad you are. So many issues that you've taken on, that we continue to take on. Criminal justice, education reform, this is such a tough thing. What did you learn? What do you know now at the end of talking to those 18 people that you didn't know before? Because you knew a lot before.
Well, I actually talked to 250 people in four geographic areas. And, you know, you talk to all kinds of people. The first person I interviewed was Claude Steele, interestingly enough, the brother of Shelby Steele, very different individuals. Claude was...
Shelby Steele, the conservative, anti-affirmative action black activist.
And his brother, so very different, then the dean of the graduate school of education at Stanford, who's done a lot of study on bias, written very, very famously about bias. He's a psychologist. That was my first interview. And so start with intellectuals. Then I went to Washington, and I met with some people at the Department of Education, met with some people at the Department of Justice. You start like that, and then you start making your way, as I did, to Stockton, which was bankrupt at the time, up to an Indian tribe, the Yurok tribe, to Philly, to Baltimore right after the riot, up and down the corridor of shame in South Carolina. So, you know, it's making a huge sort of archive to try to understand the matter on all different levels and across. And then, you know, and then comes the part of trying to make it into art after you have this information. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I have to thank the Obama White House, and I hope you'll say something about the data, you know, at some point that was so critical to me understanding the school-to-prison pipeline. Quite briefly, that in the Obama administration, we had the chance to see that children, black, brown, Native American, and I know now poor whites, are disciplined more harshly than their middle class and wealthy counterparts. And they get pushed out of school for things that could be considered mischief elsewhere, and then it's pretty much a prediction that they're going to end up in juvenile hall, and from there into cycles of incarceration. Very difficult to break those cycles. I think we all three know what that's about. And so the promise of education as the place for equity and well-being in the country, you know, looking through that lens, I'm, wow, whoo, are we worse off than we were before Brown versus Board of Ed?
You know, that was one of the powerful things about Notes from the Fields, that you're willing to kind of ask those kind of questions. I want to bring you in. You know, tough time when the Obama administration goes in. You've got the Great Recession. You've got 2 wars. You have, you know, people losing their homes. The entire time, you are focused, though, on this question of our young people, this question of education, opportunity, criminal justice. Why, when the whole thing is burning down, were you so focused on these issues?
Well, good question, Van. First, good evening, everybody. We can't see you, but we know you're there. The lights are so bright. It's an honor for me to be here with 2 people, not only who I respect enormously, but who I genuinely love. So thank you all for allowing me to join this conversation. So I think, notwithstanding everything that's going on, what President Obama recognized, beginning in his early years as a community organizer, is true north has to be making sure everybody gets a fair shot. Everybody. Most particularly our children. And so since we're telling stories, I'll just tell 2 brief stories of what really motivated me. And it frames how we looked at criminal justice reform broadly. First one, I was in Compton, California. And I visited a court run by a judge called Judge Pratt. and it was a juvenile court, and she had been presiding for a while, and she started collecting some data. And no matter what the young girls or young women, they were mostly 15, 16, 17-year-old, all juveniles, came before her for shoplifting, prostitution, you name it. The one thing they all had in common is they were victims of commercial sexual exploitation. Every one of them. And so I met with some of these girls and young women. And one girl said to me, and I'll never forget her, she said, she was in a very abusive home. She was being assaulted by relatives. And so she ran away from home. And she said a young girl cannot walk down the street in Compton 2 blocks without being stopped by a pimp. And they don't come across as a pimp. They come across as an older man taking an interest in you. And the next thing you know, he's saying, oh, you can come stay with me. And the next thing you know, you're having sex with him. And the next thing you know, you're having sex with other men. And she said to me, I was getting paid for doing what I had to do for free at home. That's story number 1. Other story, I visited El Reno Penitentiary, a federal penitentiary, with President Obama. He was the first sitting president to visit a federal penitentiary, right? And in fact, Vice did a show, Fixing the System, talking about his experience visiting El Reno. And he sat around with a handful of folks who'd been incarcerated, and he said, tell me your story. And they each started talking about what had happened to them. And he said, how many of you pled out? Every hand went out. Every hand.
They never saw a jury.
No, pled out, pled to a
plead.
lesser offense. And so they started explaining why. And one of them said to him, yeah, I pled guilty for a crime that was committed while I was here. Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. Backstage, I was like, what? And President Obama said, why would you do that? And he said, well, my lawyer said they had 2 witnesses. And President Obama said, but you were in here. That's a really good alibi. He said, well, I don't know. My lawyer told me I better do it. How little confidence must you have in the system to plead guilty for a crime that you know for a fact you have the best alibi in the world? You know it, but your own lawyer doesn't seem to appreciate it. And they say they have 2 witnesses, and you think that's better than you being behind bars. And so I say this to say the way I looked at our challenge was this, and which is why what you're doing is so important, Anna. What can we do to keep our kids out of this system in the first place? Which does mean breaking the school-to-prison pipeline. It means keeping our children in the classroom. I never understood the logic of expelling children on punishment. They didn't want to be in the class. Why are you expelling them from the class? Keep them in the classroom. Yeah. I never got that. So what do we do to just help them? And that's also initiatives like President Obama's My Brother's Keeper, designed to help boys and young men of color. The second, what can we do to make the system fairer? And that's everything from bail reform. So many people end up in jail because they can't afford to make bail. And we've seen across our country unfortunate examples of patterns and practice of that. Ferguson, Missouri being one such place.
These are people who have not yet been convicted of anything. They're in our system, innocent until proven guilty, but they can't make bail. So they sit for weeks, months, sometimes years, waiting for trial to prove whether they're innocent or guilty, but they're still in prison. They're still incarcerated.
We jail 11 million people a year in the United States. They stay an average of 23 days, yet only 5% are ultimately convicted and sentenced to a longer sentence. So now, anybody from a public policy might say, well, why am I paying to keep them for 23 days where they're going to probably plead to a lesser offense and have a criminal record? Why? Because they want to get back to their homes or their jobs or their families. And so now they've got a record, but they're not a danger. And so they're just guilty of being poor. So how do we reform that system? How do we reduce mandatory minimum sentences, which was, as you know, Van, the goal of our legislation on nonviolent drug offenders, so that they can be reunited with their families and good citizens, not wasting away in prison? And then what do we do to make sure that when people are released, we give them a second chance? Because if we don't give them that education and that job, then they're going to go right back in, which means they're going to commit another crime. So succinctly, our whole purpose was not to be soft on crime, but to be smart on crime and to make sure that if we put in place everything we tried to do to keep people out of the system, reform the system, and then give people a chance to make a living when they came out, that we were ultimately making our streets safer. That was our goal.
And that's a worthy goal, I'll tell you that. You know, I can bear witness personally to your dedication on this.
My gray hair, you've seen it.
I mean, seriously, you were in the White House working on talking about these issues. I was there. Many meetings, many battles, and yet we weren't able to get the fixes in place. This is before Trump. Everybody acts like America was perfect, and then Trump came. But we had some problems before him, and this is one of them. What was in the way? Why is it so hard? When I listen to you talk, I can't imagine a person with a functioning brainstem disagreeing. When I look at your work, anybody with a beating heart, I don't understand. From a policy point of view, we'll come back to you, but from a policy point of view, what do you think was standing in the way and is standing in the way of progress here?
This is really important. From a policy perspective, nothing. And I say that because we had about 80 votes in the Senate. You can't get 80 votes in the Senate on just about anything except maybe Ma and apple pie, and that's up for grabs these days. So the only thing standing in the way for why we were unable to get this through the Senate was Leader McConnell. That's the only thing. And I say he held up actually both the Senate and the House because we had, and this is like a little bit in the weeds about Washington, but we had the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee of the Senate, both Republicans, both chambers controlled by Republicans, both ready to bring bills forward that weren't very different from one another. And because, again, well, I shouldn't even say why. I don't know why. It doesn't know why. All I know is that Senator McConnell would not bring it up, even though his chair came to him and said, we all are in agreement that we have got to reduce these mandatory minimum sentences. We have got to return the discretion to the judges. Give them, they've looked at the facts of the case. They understand what's going on in the lives of these people. Let them have some discretion. And then let's invest back in education, et cetera, so that when they come out, they're ready. He simply wouldn't do it. So this was not a policy disagreement between Democrats and Republicans. This was one man putting his short-term political interests ahead of what was best for our country.
Terrible. Well, that sounds heartless. You're the heart doctor. You're the national heart doctor, and have been that for us for a very long time. You see the dysfunction in the political system. You see these divisions. What gives you the faith and the confidence that if you tell these stories, that we can begin to make a change?
Well, I'm not a very confident person. I still am a teacher, and I start every class, and I will be starting around March 13th. And the first thing I will say to my graduate students at NYU, who I now know pay over $90,000 a year, to go to art school, become actors. And the highest equity pay off Broadway is $800 a week. Given that fact, the first thing I say to them is confidence is overrated, give doubt a try. And so I am a person who lives in doubt, and I think that the doubt is the place where my questions come, and I'm a person full of questions. What I think that art places can do and what the theater can do is to convene people and to turn off the lights, turn off the cell phones, and to suggest something to them and ask questions in front of them. I don't believe in takeaways. And so Marcus Shelby, are you here? Is Marcus around? There's a very... okay, so Marcus, you'll see on the 24th, Marcus Shelby is a wonderful jazz bass player who's in the movie with me. And,
Give him a round of applause. Brilliant brother.
And so every single night in two of the theaters that we were in, an audience of 500 people, we would stop the show in the middle. And we would say, Marcus would join me, not having spoken to that point over with his bass, and we would say, we come from a tradition of call and response. We come from a tradition of blues shouts and field hollers. And so now's your turn. And we can't fix this. He can play the bass, I can run my mouth, but you, what are you going to do? And then we sent this audience of 500 people out into the lobby and up in the artistic director's office, the dressing rooms, and they had these talked in groups with facilitated conversations. And so I've always been interested in the potential of audience. And I now more than ever believe that arts institutions can be convening places for these very necessary conversations in our country, that we have to find ways to be intimate with strangers and think about what exactly we're going to do. And so it's not that I have confidence. I know that I'm very moved. I know that there are unanswered questions. I don't know why the country is so ridden with hate. One of the places that I went was up and down the corridor of shame in South Carolina, along I-95, these very poor neighborhoods, very bad schools. But we went to one town called Somerton. Now, most of us think that integrated schools got kicked off by Brown versus Board of Ed. But we met a petitioner, someone who signed the petition for something called Briggs versus Elliott. Y'all know about this story? In the late 40s, these Negro people in Somerton did not have a school bus to go to their segregated little schoolhouse. And they had to walk miles and miles. So the county said no. So they found some broken down school bus. And they put it together. And they said, we fixed this school bus. May we have some money for gas? And the county said no. And that was the platform for Briggs versus Elliott. And Thurgood Marshall was involved in that. And when I went back to Somerton and I talked to black people and white people and found out that even after Brown versus Board of Ed, all that work, all that struggle, the white people said, okay, we're not going to go to school with those black people. Our children aren't going to go to school with them. So we're going to make religious schools so that we don't have to have our children go to school with black people. And I talked to this white man, very elegant, big, full head of white hair, and I said, explain why. And, you know, I mean, I've been around, I know about racism. I said, but somehow in those circumstances, I found myself saying to this white man, so racism is real. And he burst out crying. And he said, it's real. It's real. I don't know why, Van. You know, I've dedicated my life so far to understanding about social justice and tribalism in this country. But this hatred, as we know very well now, right? You're private in the Love Army and all that. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know. And so then I even think, well, maybe there is space for a love revolution if hate is what's underneath all this.
Well,
But don't you think also, Anna, that, I mean, when I finished watching your play, what I think you are able to capture by literally taking the place of people in their own bodies is that you create a sense of empathy. And if I can, I mean, part of the hate, I believe, comes from people being scared of one another, not knowing anything about one another, looking at superficial reasons for why they shouldn't care for one another. But if you can break it down and let them feel a sense of empathy of what that must be like for you, then perhaps some of that goes away. And I remember just, you know, as soon as you closed each scene, feeling like I knew that person, right? And if you know a person, then at least it allows you to care about them and to care about what happens to them. And so that's part of Van's Love Army,
Well,
right there.
I don't want to, you know, be, you know, whatever that name is of the person that brings all this catastrophe, but, you know, but on the other hand, isn't that part of what the argument for Brown versus Board of Ed was? That if we could just, you know, sit next to each other,
Yes.
it could be better. I mean, y'all, you know, what do y'all think about what happened?
well, let me just say that I have a different view of what's wrong with the country than most of my liberal and progressive friends. I'm a historian. I can go way back in history to try to find the roots of things. And I can go all the way back to 2008.
A lifetime ago.
It was a whole
Where-
decade.
Yeah, like 2008, where, people actually did the work to bring the country together. The country didn't just come together because Barack Obama asked us to. He empowered people to do the work. In 2008, everybody was going to swing states. Everybody was making phone calls, phone banking. If you weren't phone banking, if you didn't have a bumper sticker, you couldn't walk around in civilized society. In 2008, we did the work. We understood that democracy is a struggle. 2016, we were offended, but I don't know that people worked as hard. And so I don't believe the country is as bad as people think it is. I think we took a lot for granted. And what I believe is, when I think about the work that you're doing, and when I think about, this new political movement with these young people, I see a lot of reason for hope. When you look at these young people, who have, breakdowns can lead to breakthroughs. Talk about, Valerie Jarrett, this movement of young people beginning to rise now against violence and against hatred.
Well, let me start. I will, Vanna, but let me start by just a quick story about 2008, because I tell a story about, I told it throughout the campaign after South Carolina, visiting South Carolina in a very small town, and one of our young people who was a field organizer, and they ran our campaign. They told everybody else what to do. Why? Because they'd been on the ground getting to know the community. And so I come into a library with about 40 people. My organizer, Ashley Bai, said, this is what we're going to do, Miss Jarrett. I'm going to introduce myself and tell my story. And she tells a story to this audience of everyone there was twice her age, about how when she was about 8, her mother developed cancer and had to quit her job because she was so sick. And when she quit her job, she lost her health insurance. And when she lost her health insurance, they went into medical bankruptcy trying to pay for her bills. And she opens up and tells a story. And she said, but I heard President Obama's mom died of cancer as well. And I wanted my mom to live. And I figured if I voted for and worked for somebody who had the same situation as my mom was in, that he would take care of my mom. And so they go around the room, and everybody tells me, what are you interested in, so that I will tailor my remarks to what they want to hear. And we go all the way around, and people are, I care about the economy, I care about veterans benefits, I care about energy, and we get to an older black man, and he said, I care about Ashley. And I'm here because of her. And President Obama, I told him the story, and he put it in his speech on Martin Luther King's birthday at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And he said, this is what the campaign is about, a young white woman who can make a connection with an older black man. And those two would have never come together but for the campaign. But the question is that sustainable without a political leader? I believe it is. And I believe that we've had a wake-up call. And we were talking backstage about the remarkable eloquence of these young people in Florida who are, right? They have just been through the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And they're standing up on national television, and I'm shaking, worrying about them. I didn't need to be, they were fine. They were articulate, they were passionate, they were fearless. And you know what? We better watch out, because they are coming to our rescue. I am convinced of that.
Well, one of the people who I talked to a lot in the time that I was making notes from the field is Pedro Nogueira, who's a great scholar of education. Anybody out here know Pedro's work? Applaud if you do. And this was in 2015 that I sat down with him, finally had a formal interview. And he said to me then, he said, a movement is going to happen among high school students. He said, not college students the way it did in the 60s, because it's so expensive and they're very busy. They have to have many jobs and all this kind of stuff. I don't think he thought it would be because of this, But if it did take, if I were organizing that movement, I would just tell everybody not to go to school. you know.
Well, they're
for a
having a
long-
national
for a-
walkout day.
for a long- when's the
they're doing
walkout?
that.
March
March
14th.
24th?
March 14th. Mm-hmm.
And they're also planning on marching to Washington. They were laying in
But
front
I
of the
mean,
White
but
House
could you
today.
imagine, like Lysistrata, if they just wouldn't go till the end of the year, even senior year?
Well, I don't know if they'll go that far.
Well, no,
This
but
is
if
like
they did-
symbolically one day.
No, but if they did, you know, they're not good, not getting their SAT scores in. They're not going to show up at wherever they're supposed to end up in college. I mean, I think it would be pretty incredible if they just really would not go.
I just
This
want to
is where
say.
my doubt comes in.
I
Now
just,
I'm the doubter.
I just
There's
want
a
to say.
lot of people who wouldn't even be in the movement who just don't want to go.
I just want to say that if my children are watching this,
Don't
she's
try
not
it at
talking
home.
to you. She's talking to other people's children.
Now, look, you know, now that we're sort of laughing and we're not crying anymore, I wasn't being Debbie Downer anymore. I do want to take a moment to recognize and thank, because it is a work of art we just did, and a lot of people worked very hard and spent a whole lot of money. I want to thank Christy Zia, who's the director of Notes from the Field, who's here tonight.
Yes, she's here. Wave your arm around. There you go. Give her a round of applause. That's hard work.
And I just thanked fabulous Marcus Shelby, who's the first artist who worked with me on the project as a play before I had anybody else involved. Is Ann Holdboard, the costume designer, here tonight? Annie. Annie was the second person who signed up to work with me, and I certainly want to thank Len Amato, who is the head of film at HBO, for taking a chance at putting this on the air on Saturday night. Len?
Yeah. Thank you. He's being shy, but he's right there. Look, there's good stuff in this country. You are a shining example of it in the arts. There's a cultural movement
Oh, huge.
that is massive.
Massive.
And, you know, we have some great patrons of the arts, you know, here with us. There's a cultural movement that's massive. I'm seeing young, especially young female artists of color, they're not being quiet. And sometimes those movements get out there, and you just watching TV and you don't see it, and then you look up and you've got a big
Well,
positive
here's the
response
thing.
through the arts as well as through politics.
Well, you know what's really none of these things can happen overnight, right? Because art does take skill. You know, it's like for what I do, everybody thinks you stand up and run your mouth. But, you know, if you're hanging around, you know, Marcus, you know, he practices. I've worked with a classical violinist and a classical cellist. They practice 5 times a day. We understand these kinds of artists.
Ma'am, I'm sorry. I don't think anybody thinks what you do is easy.
Well, okay.
So just
But-
I don't.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but nonetheless, you know, there is something called skills, and there is something called excellence. And what's very exciting to me is I've been interested in artists who want to do work for social change since the 90s. I had an institute at Harvard dedicated to that for 3 summers. Now, in the last decade, I don't go to a college to speak where the artists aren't telling me that they want their work to mean something and to get dedicated to something. And at NYU, we even have a whole department now, Art and Public Policy. And so we have a genre. We have a real genre of this type of art. And no matter what happens, I believe that part of the result is going to be some magnificent works of art. Art that's not dogmatic, that manages to put together everything in a formal way. And so just as an artist, I'm really excited about that genre and watching it grow.
You've been so busy on this tour. I don't know if you've seen the Black Panther movie.
I haven't, but everybody in the world has.
Exactly.
I feel like I have.
Yeah, exactly. You saw the trailer several thousand times.
No. I mean, Melody was the first person.
Yeah.
You have Melody Hobson. You know, she's very, demanding about this type of thing.
Effusive.
Effusive. I mean,
Yeah.
very clear, and she doesn't like everything either. Yeah. So I'm like, wow, I can't wait. So tell us about it.
Well,
have you seen it?
The reason I raise it is I don't want to have any spoilers here. But the reason I raise it is because you mentioned this thing about art taking a while and the artist wanting to have a bigger impact. And, you know, Ryan Coogler, just to brag on him for a second, he's a 31-year-old kid from Oakland who got a $200 million budget.
I thought it was 350.
Oh, maybe. Well, I think they made 350 in the past 3 days.
No, didn't you tell
Was
me
it-
it
was
was
it 350?
350 million, Christy? The budget. Yeah. Okay.
Hey, listen. He got
It was a lot of money.
He got a lot of money.
As they say in Oakland,
After
he
it's
got a
100
hell of money.
After it's 100 million, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. After that first 100 million, it starts to be real money. So, but he is so courageous in being willing. He took Marvel from grade school, good guys, bad guys, to grad school. I mean, he's talking about colonization. He's the womanist politics. There are 4 women. There are 4. I should have said that earlier. There are 4 women, 4 black women in this film. Each of them could have had their own movie in terms of how powerful they showed up. So I just want to say to you, and we're going to get questions from the audience, these seeds that you have been planting out here are starting to germinate. I just want to say it to you personally. There are people who were little bitty kids watching you and watching other people. And when a 31-year-old kid from Oakland gets a budget like that and makes a movie like that, he's not by himself. There's a whole army of people, a love army perhaps, but there's a whole army of young people who are going to use their voices for good. So I want to just say to you, you've opened up something. You mentioned Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall opened up something. We act like nothing good came out of the civil rights movement. We're here. We're here.
Oh, a
Like
lot good.
Yeah.
A lot good.
So, so that said, I want to get the audience questions. I saw some cards going around.
While we're having
Yeah.
cards come up, could I say one more thing
Yeah,
about
please,
the movie I have
yeah,
not
yeah.
seen yet? But I do listen to Michelle Obama, and she tweeted today, and this kind of gets to the heart of the point you were just making. All the young people who are going to see that movie about those amazing leaders are going to say, oh, you know what? I can aspire to that too. And so the point, I think, is that culture changes by one person at a time, and then the ripple effect starts to really make an impact. And that's how we change what we're calling pop culture, too. A lot of the television shows in the 10, 15, 30, 40 years ago set the tone for what's happening today because we could see something that we could aspire to, right? And that's what art can do. And so life can imitate good art. And I get back to the word empathy. It really is truly about telling a story where somebody can connect and say, that could be my family. That could be me.
Well, look.
A lot of questions.
Yeah. So we have a lot of questions. Some of them are just complimenting y'all and saying how amazing you are. So I'll just.
Those.
Okay. I'll
Just kidding.
always throw me off. So one question I think is a very basic question, which we can never get enough of answering, is what can the average person do to make an impact and help bring about positive change to our criminal justice system?
Well, I just want to say a few things. I know you've got these on message about this, but you know, one thing is very important is just to start where you are. And knowing, going on this press tour, that people would ask me about that, and even as I told you, we stopped the show in the middle and asked people to go off and talk about what they can do. I decided to just take a poll of the people who helped me write Notes from the Field and say, you know, did anything happen to you as a result of this? And, you know, Marcus, our beautiful bass player, you know, he tells me that as a result of working on Notes from the Field, he visits juvenile hall twice a month. Christy Zia, who has been the production designer for some of the greatest production designers of her generation, having worked with Jonathan Demme. And I must also say that Jonathan Demme was planning to direct this movie, and we lost him before he could. So can we clap so he can hear us in heaven? And so Christy, you know, who's worked with Demme and Scorsese and all these people, said that what she's used to is looking at a set and everybody's white. And so the next time she crews up, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And, you know, to make something like Panther, you know, those are opportunities for folks who are not just white men to come in there and work towards excellence. And my assistant who traveled with me up and down the corridor of shame, all kinds of places, has changed her career. She doesn't want to be an actor anymore. She's going to school to become a psychoanalyst. So, I mean, I think that part of this is about, no, she's going to the Freud Institute in New York City. This is really true. So I think that, you know, it's about proximity. I think part of it's about proximity, is getting close enough to it that you can see it and empathize with it, and you'd be surprised at what you might end up doing.
I agree completely that it's always good to start local, because you care about your community, and it could be your block club, it could be your ward. Where I'm from Chicago, everything's in parishes, whatever is your community. But I also think you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
And I knew Glenn Van would agree with me on that, because I think a piece of what you're trying to do on your show is to get people comfortable coming outside of their comfort zone and actually listening to people with whom you might think you disagree. And I think part of the challenge we have in this new era of technology and social media is it's very easy to stay in your own little cocoon and never venture out. And I'm worried, as much as I have confidence in the next generation leading us to a brighter future, I'm worried about these devices that they are so attached to. They're powerful tools and instruments, and a lot of what you have to do is your homework, and they don't ever have to go to the library and look up anything on those cards that we had to do. It's right there for them. But I also want them to put them down for a second and actually listen to somebody with whom they disagree. Yeah. So I say it's both start local and get comfortable and then blossom out from there.
You know, yeah, I agree with that. You know, you mentioned my show, the Van Jones Show, 7 p.m. on Saturday on CNN. We do this thing where we do what we call a van in the van. And I get in a van, I go to the place, and I just got back from Las Vegas. And I went there to talk to the people who were the survivors of the massacre then. We've gotten so used to these massacres that a massacre that happened in October, where 500 people were shot, is almost like it was 20 years ago. That was just October. And so I went back and I picked up a anti-gun Democratic woman who was a survivor, a pro-gun Republican mother, both of the mothers, who was also a survivor. And then we picked up the man who ran the gun shop, who sold the guns to the sniper. And we got in the car and we drove around Las Vegas and we drove back to the site. And it was an extraordinary conversation. Nobody held back. Nobody bit their tongue. But you talk about proximity. For them to actually be in the same car, child-proof locks can't get out, they were able to come to a place where they could agree to disagree, but they could also agree on some things. My problem with progressives and liberals now is they say, well, I won't even listen to Fox News. I won't even listen. I just can't listen. And I just want to bring this back around to you, Valerie, because people don't give you and Michelle Obama and Barack Obama enough credit for the physical courage that it took for you to do what you did. People, I mean, there's physical courage required to be in public life and to be African American and to be challenging the system on the campaign trail in the White House. We were, you know, we just stopped talking about it, but there's a physical level of courage that you had to have, and you had to engage with people in the Republican Party. What you guys represented is a level of courage and engagement, even when they didn't want to deal with you. You still had to try to figure out a way forward. You cared more about the country than you cared about those insults from them. Do you have anything to say to liberals and progressives who say they like Dr. King? Dr. King got shot in the face in front of his friends, and none of those friends quit. Who will say, I just can't go on because of a tweet? I mean, what is...
Well, first of all, man, let's not label all progressives and liberals in one big category like that. That's fine. But I understand your point in that we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And there are countless examples over the 8 years that I had the privilege of working in the White House where we had to make concessions to try to get something done. Healthcare was the most obvious, where there were a lot of people who thought the public option was the best thing to do. And you know what? It might have been, but we couldn't get it passed. And so you have to make concessions. But then there's another piece of it, which I think you're also implying, and I give you 2 quick examples of this, which is that you have to work with people with whom you might disagree on a whole host of issues. And you and I worked together on criminal justice reform. We also worked with Mark Holden, the general counsel of Coke Industries, on it. And there were a lot of my friends who said, how can you possibly work with Coke? They've been the number one business trying to ensure that your boss never gets reelected. I said, because we can't get it done without Democratic and Republican votes. And they were very effective in persuading many of the Republicans that got us to the total of 80 votes to come on board. They gave them cover, and they came at it with the right approach, which is they were being pragmatic too. Or immigration reform, we worked very closely with Rupert Murdoch. I had a lot of people who said, why are you having dinner with Rupert Murdoch? Why? Because he believed in immigration reform. And I think that's part of how the democracy works, is that there are strange bedfellows, and it's all about figuring out how can we be a force for good, not perfect? Good, because good is better. Good is better than nothing. 20 million people without health care is better than none. So you do it.
I don't mean to, I'm tougher on liberals than I am on conservatives because I just hold us to higher standards. Somebody said, when they go low, we go high, and I still believe in that.
I remember that
And so-
person.
I remember that person.
Exactly.
Y'all remember that person?
That's a line in our show, in the new show for the people. I get to say it too.
Wait, you can't whisper on stage. What you talking about?
I was just
Anna
saying
said it's a
that
line in the show.
The line has been noted in the new show I'm in Shondaland called For the People. And so,
Yes.
it's
But her
been
message,
memorialized.
which was a good message that we all, I hope, teach our children, which is, you know what? You have a strong moral compass
Yes.
and a good sense of your true north, and you need to keep going in that direction and not let anybody else bring you down.
Yeah.
Compromise is not bringing you down, though,
Yeah,
right?
I agree with that. So a couple quick questions, and we may have to wrap this up. But empathy is a two-way street. It really is. We want the hateful people to be more empathetic. The challenge is, how do you have empathy back the other direction? And that's the great thing about your work, is that it just feels so honest. It doesn't feel judgmental.
I mean, it is the gift of the actor. Any actor has to have an empathic imagination, right? So, remember a long time ago, I had a play called Fires in the Mirror. Probably everybody here is too young to remember. And, and I had a very progressive friend, one of those Bay Area progressive friends who was Jewish, but was very upset that I, gave voice to the Lubavitch here. And at one point, she said to me, I mean, would you play a Nazi? And I said, yeah. Because my craft is supposed to be about making myself available to all strands of the human condition. So, I mean, I think it's of our nature in acting, you can't be one if you can't imagine yourself in the circumstances of somebody else. And I think that the empathic imagination is not just the soft stuff. I think it's really good to, be able to really feel who the person is on the other side of the aisle. I mean, I think it's really good for warriors to understand, who the enemy is. I bet you when y'all were getting the president, I still call him the president, Obama, ready, for debates, I mean, you had to imagine what the other side was going to be, right? Somebody had to play
Absolutely.
that part. If somebody wouldn't play that part for him, he wouldn't have a decent sparring partner. So I feel there's something very practical about the empathic imagination.
I love this. Listen, there's some practical questions. What would you say to all the young women out there hoping to make a difference and someday to be on stage like you? What would you say to the young women out there? Honest question.
Work hard.
Yeah.
Work really hard.
Was it Lily Tomlin who said it best? Can somebody show me the way to Carnegie Hall practice? I do have a book called Letters to a Young Artist that I highly recommend. which is really about, courage and understanding that nobody can take your dignity away. I think that's the most important thing in our profession. I want to go back, speaking of young women, I want to go back to something you said earlier in the first story you told, Valerie. And I remember when I was in San Francisco, one of the lawyers that I sat down to talk with about the school-to-prison pipeline said, well, my problem is the school-to-prostitution pipeline. And a lot of times it is the fact that young ladies get dropped out of this particular conversation. And, prostitution is one of those things that is plaguing the community.
It's plaguing the community in a horrendous, calculating way, and it makes money, and it preys upon the vulnerable, and it's often, as my story indicated, those women and young girls who have already been victims of abuse at home. And so it's not a foreign agent to them, and once they fall into it, it's very hard to break that cycle and to be welcomed back in school. And there are practical problems. I mean, just one quick other story. I met a young woman who was truant. And I said, well, why are you truant? And she said, because my family's homeless. And I said, I know, but you're signed up for a school. And she said, I go to school and the kids tease me because I don't smell good. Well, these are some real, there are some children in our community that need to be bathed and fed and loved on a regular basis. And let's begin with some empathy for them.
And also, that's why I signed up, really. It wasn't my idea to work on the school-to-prison pipeline. Really, some philanthropists told me about this. But the further I went down my road towards 250 interviews, I thought, it is absolutely unfair to call this the school-to-prison pipeline, because it makes schools and teachers look like they're responsible for something that's so much more complex. And this is about poverty. And if we want schools to be that intervention against poverty, against centuries of inequality and racism, then we're going to have to make places that are very different than what they are right now.
That's true.
Getting into the lightning round now. So many good questions. And everybody out there
See
like,
that?
what?
Questions. It's all about doubt.
Exactly. Well, but I got like 50 people out there. You better ask my question. I'm going to tell you that. Would any of the three of you please consider running for president? And and in the alternative, who should run for president after we dump you know who? So. No.
Van Jones for president.
I saw that job up close and personal, and I can tell you, I ain't got the stuff. Y'all were amazing, but that's not. I'm good at running my mouth, not running country. So look, who should run? Y'all Chicago folk, what about your sister Oprah? Give us somebody. Give us some hope. Who could do it? Is there anybody out there could do it? I'd vote for Elmer Fudd at this point.
I don't have one yet. What do you think?
I think it's too early. I think there are going to be a lot of really good people who emerge. And I say it's the person who we think is going to be the unifier and bring us together and to lead us forward, not somebody who's going to be.
We can't be more tribal than we are right now, right? Yeah.
Because we are a big, messy, complicated, richly diverse country. Stronger together. That was somebody's expression. I think.
Amen.
I didn't even know that until I said it.
With the plethora of negative things distracting our children and adults, what is the answer to get people focused on the good things in life that are available to them right now? You talked about putting the devices down. How do we get people keep them focused on positive stuff?
I mean, I actually think if we stopped somebody on the street and said, what's a good thing you saw today? They'd have something to say. I mean, I think that, as humans, we are complex receivers. It's actually true psychologically that for survival, we tend to focus on the negative thing because, that's the thing that's threatening us. But I personally, even in the process of writing notes from the field, found left it with an enormous amount of hope because I met a lot of people working very, 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 very hard with very few resources. And so, you know, I think look around you. I remember asking Jonathan Demme, who was going to direct this, and it was so marvelous to have my initial conversations with him. And he doesn't believe in God. And I said, well, what's the source of what brings you up, what brings you out when you can't find an answer or you've lost courage? And he said, people. You know, all he has to go outside, do is go outside and walk down the street. And so there's that, and especially in a place like this, New York City.
I completely agree. Get out, talk to some folks.
Yeah, talk to real people. All right, last 3 questions. I'm sorry, I can't get to everybody. I wish I could. So tell us a little bit about the music that was created for the HBO film.
Marcus should speak. Can we give him a mic and just let him speak to that? I mean, Marcus,
Run up here, brother. Give him a round of applause while he comes. Brag on him a little bit. Why is he such a great collaborator for you?
You know, Marcus and I actually first met because I asked him to participate in a workshop that I was doing. And, you know, first of all, I felt that there should be an African-American man on the stage, visible. That's number one. And number two,
Why?
I just think that the black male body is a reality in this matter, in this issue. And you will see that he's a pretty fine-looking brother, and I thought I would give the people something beautiful to look at. And and I think that, you know, Marcus, you speak to it, but I think we both understood that we're coming out of this tradition of call and response and the blues. And so I think that, you know, given the mission of the project to evoke conversation, it's call and response. And I think that there's something about this is about the blues. And so here he is, Marcus Shelby.
Another round of applause for Marcus.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to have worked with Anna. It's been a 5-year journey, and it began in a workshop, and we met, and we discovered that we had a lot of things in common, but central to that was our experience growing up. We both come out of the church experience where music was a big part, and that music would be central, call and response on how maybe the minister and the audience would respond back and forth. I play string bass. My music comes directly out of the black experience, which goes way back to slavery, blues shouts, work songs, field hollers, spirituals. That music was used in a very profound way for freedom. And so when I met Anna, and she had just begun actually research on this project, I took an interest in the school-to-prison pipeline, mass incarceration. I had been reading Van Jones and kind of absorbing the world around me and knew that this was a central issue. So by the time I had met Anna, I was already kind of focusing my music in that direction. And then when she played me the interviews, we talked about how music could support the theater experience in this case, call and response, much like the blues music that I grew up listening to and was informed by is utilized. And so that was our initial purpose, to create moods just with a bass. I primarily work with a big band where you have maybe 15, 16 voices. In this case, it was just the singular voice of the bass and the resonant voice of the bass. Anna, to me, reminds me of all the great blues singers, whether it's Bessie Smith or you know, all the ones that came out in the 20s that, ironically, a predominant amount of that music was about the prison experience. Black people were surrounded by prisons in the 20s as they have been since the 70s up until today. And Bessie Smith and some of the early blues singers sang about that experience. And so it was sort of a natural fit to use the blues as a way of communicating the moods and the characters of which Anna so brilliantly portrayed in the play. So that was our starting point, and that was our end point. The blues is a central part of the music of all American music, stems from the blues. So it was, for me, it was a perfect way to sort of accompany her in this story.
Thank you, Marcus.
Amazing. Yeah, that's beautiful. It's that was just, I'm moved because people honoring each other. We need more of that. You know, like you said, this is my brother. You said, this is my sister. It's so simple. You know, I think we need Sesame Street for grown people now.
Hey, you know, the guy who made that fabulous movie, 20 Feet from Stardom, I ran into him in a restaurant in L.A. And I said, what do you, Morgan Neville, I said, what are you doing now? And he said, I'm doing a movie about Mr. Rogers. And I said, Mr. Rogers? And he said,
Dude, though, that's my dude.
he said, oh yeah. He said,
He gangster. I'm telling you. Go ahead.
he said, oh yeah, radical kindness.
I'm
Radical
telling y'all, Mr. Rogers is
Telling
gangster.
you, the stuff that seems like the soft stuff is going to be essential to the revolution. In writing notes from the field and bringing it to audiences and asking them to be a part of call and response, we started to talk about a radical welcome, a radical hospitality. And I think that arts institutions need to extend that radical hospitality.
Look, let me just say to you guys why Mr. Rogers is dope. Look, young children are put in a world that they don't understand. And it's scary, man. We forget. The first thing you try and do is just like, quote unquote, grow up, which means just forget all those terrors and all those anxieties and all that wonder and just, you know, get in your lane and do your job and shut up. But it takes a lot of conditioning for that. But when you're little, man, this is a crazy place. And you need a safe place to be able to understand. I dare you to Google Mr. Rogers' speech before Congress, begging them for money to fund public television. If you can watch that and without breaking down crying, I'm serious, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you because this man explains how you don't have to show somebody punching somebody in the head for drama. Getting a haircut for a child, right? Your mom being sick. These are huge, dramatic moments in the life of a child. And television should help people. And I'm telling you right now, grown people are now in a world we don't understand. And the children in the world, they don't understand. So now we got Nazis and robots and all kind of weird stuff as grown people. And we have to help each other. Listen, I know y'all, believe me, man, the most radical thing we can do right now is just to try to help each other get through this, because as terrible as the situation is developing in Washington, D.C. or whatever, I'm going to tell you right now, I go all over the country. Ordinary people, this stuff is going over their head. They're just scared. They don't know if they count. They don't know if they matter. They don't know if anybody loves them. And if we don't go out there and give them something to belong to, we can't be mad when the Nazis do it. We can't be mad when the gangbangers do it. We have to be willing to do it. And I'm going to tell you, Mr. Rogers is like the gangster of love, man.
I like
Gangster.
that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I'm gonna let you guys have your closing comments. But the two questions I didn't get you, and you can wrap them in if you want to. What art inspires you, and how can we use the momentum from your film? And maybe we'll start with you, Valerie, and then we'll let her close. What art is inspiring you these days? Any art, music, anybody on television, anything, and how can we use the momentum from a film like this?
Anything that touches your soul can be inspiring. It can be just a few notes. It can be a tune from an old song where you're dancing to the blue lights in the basement and it just conjures up smells and feelings and whatever. And maybe this is what your point was about, Mr. Rogers, is we have to teach people how to continue to feel and to feel in a positive way, not just feel in a negative and an angry way. And the arts can do that for us if we are open to it, if we can pause for just a minute and just sit and listen and be present. And I think one of the things that art does for me is it forces me to be present. There's no way anyone could sit and watch your movie, having seen your play, and not be mesmerized by it, because you just bring them in. And that feels really good. So thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Magic.
Well, look, you know, I just want to close by thanking again Len Amato, Marcus Shelby, Christy Zia, Ann Holt Ward, Gary Getzman, anybody else who's here in the audience who has helped us make this movie, and to presume to thank you and all of you who are going to watch it on behalf of the children that I am trying to shed a light on. And, you know, Sherilyn Ifill poses a very important question in the beginning of the movie, or suggests to us that this is a country built on investments. We have the imagination and the capability to have invested in something as massive as the interstate highway system. And so we're now at this very important moment. You know, are we going to invest in prisons, or are we going to invest in schools? Are we going to invest in mental health, or are we going to invest in prisons? And so that's what we have laid out for us. And I have to say that this is a country that wrote and spoke itself into existence. And for me, the art that's the beginning of all my art, and the art that I love the most, is the art of conversation. And I think this is one of the best ones I've had in a very long time.
That was good. You bound that around.
Give a round of applause to two legends, two icons, Anna Deavere Smith, Valerie Jarrett.